Taman Park crawled through the narrow maintenance tunnel deep inside the Coalition dreadnought Stellar Harmony. His blue coveralls were soaked with sweat and stained with coolant fluid that glowed faintly purple in the dim light. The fusion core hummed loudly around him, a sound that would make most people nervous. But for Taman, it was like a lullaby. He had been working in the engine rooms for 3 years now. Every day was the same routine. Wake up at 0600 hours, grab breakfast from the crew mess, report to Chief Engineer Yoon Seo Choi for the daily assignment list, then crawl through pipes and tunnels fixing things that kept the massive ship running. The Stellar Harmony was one of the largest ships in the Coalition fleet. It housed over 5,000 crew members from 12 different alien species. The ship stretched nearly 2 kilometers from bow to stern and carried enough firepower to level a small moon. But none of that impressive power meant anything if the engines failed. That was where mechanics like Taemin came in. While the fancy alien pilots got all the glory flying their sleek fighters, the human mechanics kept everything working behind the scenes. They fixed the broken parts, cleaned the filters, and made sure the life support systems never failed. Taemin finished replacing a worn coolant valve and wiped his hands on a dirty rag. The valve was supposed to last 6 months, but this one had failed after only 2 weeks. He made a mental note to check the other valves in this section soon. As he crawled back through the tunnel, Taemin thought about the flight simulator he had hidden in his quarters. It was an old training unit that had been marked for disposal. Instead of throwing it away, he had quietly repaired it and installed it in the small space behind his bunk. Late at night, when his shift was over and his roommate Sora Kim was asleep, Taemin would practice flying. The simulator was basic compared to the real training systems used by the pilot candidates, but it worked, and Taemin was good at it. Better than good, actually. He had completed every standard training scenario, with scores that would qualify him for the Coalition pilot program. The problem was that no human had ever been accepted into that program. The other alien species considered humans too slow, too clumsy, and too emotional to be trusted with expensive fighter craft. Taemin emerged from the tunnel and stretched his aching back. The engine room was massive, filled with pipes, conduits, and machinery that most people could never understand. But Taemin knew every component. He could walk through this room blindfolded and tell you what each sound meant and which machines were running at peak efficiency. "Park, get over here," called Chief Engineer Choi from across the room. She was standing next to a diagnostic panel that was flashing red warning lights. Taemin jogged over, his tool belt jangling with each step. "What's the problem, Chief?" "Power fluctuations in the fighter bay," Choi said, pointing at the readout. "The Veltharian pilots are complaining that their systems keep cutting out during pre-flight checks." Taemin studied the data scrolling across the screen. The power levels were spiking and dropping in a regular pattern. It looked familiar, but he needed to see the actual hardware to be sure. "I'll need to check the distribution junction in Bay 7, he said. "Probably a loose connection or a failing regulator." "Take Jung-soo with you," Choi ordered, "and be quick about it. Commander Veltar is already angry about the delays." Taemin grabbed his toolkit and found Jung-soo Min, another human mechanic, who specialized in electrical systems. Together, they made their way through the ship's corridors toward the fighter bays. The Stellar Harmony was like a small city floating in space. The corridors were wide enough for 3 people to walk side by side, and they stretched for kilometers in every direction. Signs in 12 different languages pointed toward various sections of the ship. As they walked, they passed crew members from many different species. The tall, blue-skinned Zephyrians moved with precise, calculated steps. Their large heads contained brains that could process mathematical equations faster than most computers. The 4-armed Veltharians strutted confidently through the halls, their superior reflexes and coordination making them natural pilots. And then there were the humans. Shorter than most aliens, slower than the Veltharians, and less intelligent than the Zephyrians. At least that's what everyone believed. Humans were good for manual labor, basic maintenance, and other simple tasks that didn't require much skill or intelligence. Taemin had heard these opinions his whole life. Growing up on Earth, he had dreamed of becoming a starship pilot and exploring the galaxy. But when he applied for the Coalition Academy, He was politely told that humans were better suited for support roles. So here he was, crawling through maintenance tunnels while alien pilots lived his dream. They reached Fighter Bay 7, and Taemin immediately got to work. The power distribution junction was a complex piece of equipment that regulated electricity, flow to 12 different fighter craft. Jong-soo held the scanner while Taemin opened the access panel. There, Taemin said, pointing at a component deep inside the junction box. See that regulator? The housing is cracked, causing intermittent failures. Jong-soo squinted at the part. I can barely see it. How did you spot that so fast? Practice, Taemin replied. He had seen this exact problem twice before in other sections of the ship. The regulators were manufactured by a Zephyrian company that used a ceramic compound that became brittle over time. As they worked to replace the faulty component, the bay doors opened and several Veltharian pilots entered. They were tall and imposing, with forearms that could operate complex flight controls simultaneously. Their reflexes were 3 times faster than human normal, making them deadly in combat. Commander Veltar led the group. He was the squadron leader and considered one of the best pilots in the coalition fleet. His crimson skin was marked with ritual scars that indicated his combat victories. How much longer will this take? Veltar demanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed immediately. Almost finished, Commander, Taemin replied without looking up from his work. Just need to calibrate the new regulator. This is the 3rd power failure this month, Veltar continued. Your human maintenance crews are clearly incompetent. Taemin's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. He focused on adjusting the regulator settings, making sure the power flow would be stable. Maybe if your people spent less time dreaming about flying and more time learning to fix things properly, we wouldn't have these problems, Veltar added with a dismissive laugh. The other Veltharian pilots chuckled at their commander's joke. To them, the idea of a human pilot was absurd. Jong-soo looked angry, but Taemin placed a hand on his friend's arm. Getting into an argument with the pilots would only cause more problems. Power flow is now stable, Taemin announced, closing the access panel. You shouldn't have any more issues. We'll see, Veltar said coldly. Next time there's a problem, I'm requesting that real technicians handle the repairs. The Veltharian pilots walked away, leaving Taemin and Jong-soo alone in the bay. Jong-soo started to say something angry, but Taemin shook his head. Let it go, Taemin said quietly. We have work to finish. But as they packed up their tools, Taemin made a disturbing discovery. The power regulator hadn't failed randomly. The ceramic housing had cracked in a specific pattern that indicated a design flaw. If his analysis was correct, every regulator of this type throughout the ship would eventually fail the same way. And most of those regulators were installed in the fighter craft themselves. Taemin spent the rest of his shift thinking about the problem. That evening, he ran a diagnostic simulation on his hidden flight computer. The results confirmed his fears. If the regulators failed during combat operations, the fighter craft would lose power at the worst possible moment. He had to warn someone. But who would listen to a human mechanic? The next morning, Taemin requested a meeting with Commander Veltar. He waited outside the pilot briefing room for over an hour before the Veltharian commander finally agreed to see him. What do you want? Grease monkey? Veltar asked, not bothering to look up from his tactical reports. Sir, I've discovered a serious problem with the power regulators in your fighters, Taemin began. The ceramic housings are prone to stress fractures that could cause complete power failure. Veltar finally looked up, his 4 eyes narrowing with irritation. Are you suggesting that Zephyrian engineering is flawed? I'm suggesting that these specific components have a manufacturing defect that needs to be addressed before your next combat mission. Veltar stood up to his full height, towering over the human mechanic. Stick to your wrenches and coolant pumps, human. Leave the real work to those born for it. But sir, if I'm right about this, you're not. Veltar cut him off. Humans see problems everywhere because you don't understand advanced technology. My fighters are in perfect condition, and I don't need a maintenance worker telling me otherwise. Taemin tried to explain further, but Veltar dismissed him with a wave of his hand. The meeting was over. That night, Taman sat in his quarters, staring at the diagnostic data on his computer screen. Sora Kim was repairing a broken comm unit at the small desk they shared. "You look worried," Sora observed. She was one of the few people who knew about Taimin's secret flight simulations. The bridge of the Stellar Harmony buzzed with activity as crew members rushed to their battle stations. Captain Do-hyun Lee stood at the center of the command deck, his calm voice cutting through the chaos. "Report," he ordered. 36 enemy vessels dropping out of hyperspace," announced the Zephyrian sensor operator. "They're flying hegemony colors, sir." Captain Lee frowned. The hegemony was a militant faction that had been causing trouble along the outer rim for months. Their ships were fast, heavily armed, and their crews fought with the desperation of fanatics. "Are we outnumbered?" Lee asked. 3-1, Captain," came the reply. "But our ships are larger and better equipped." In the fighter bays, pilots ran to their craft as alarm bells continued to ring. Commander Veltar reached his fighter first, his forearms moving quickly over the pre-flight controls. The power systems showed green across the board. "All fighters report ready for launch," he announced over the comm system. "Launch when ready," Captain Lee responded. "Good hunting." Taman and Sora made their way to the engineering section as quickly as possible. The corridors were crowded with crew members rushing to their emergency positions. Chief Engineer Choi was already at her station when they arrived. "Parkman, I need you monitoring the power distribution systems," Choi ordered. "If we start taking damage, I want to know about power failures before they happen." Taman took his position at a monitoring console. The screen showed power flow to every system on the ship, including the fighter squadron that was just launching. He watched nervously as the fighters cleared the launch bays and headed toward the enemy fleet. The first few minutes of the battle went well. The coalition fighters were outnumbered, but their superior training and equipment gave them an advantage. Veltar's squadron destroyed 3 hegemony fighters without taking any losses. Then Taimin's worst fears came true. "Power failure in Fighter 7, he announced, his voice tight with worry. "Complete electrical shutdown." On the main screen, they watched as one of the Veltharian fighters suddenly went dark and began drifting helplessly through space. Without power, the pilot couldn't control his ship or defend himself. "That's Kix-9's fighter," someone said. "He's sitting duck out there." "Fighter 12 is also showing power fluctuations," Taman added, checking his readings. "And Fighter 3 has intermittent failures." Captain Lee's face grew grim as he realized what was happening. "How many fighters are affected?" "At least 6 showing problems so far, sir," Taman replied. "The failures are spreading." Commander Veltar's voice crackled over the comm system. "Control, we have multiple system failures. Requesting immediate support." 2 more Veltharian pilots tried to reach the drifting fighter to provide protection, but their own ships began experiencing power problems. One pilot, Tervol, managed to get close enough to use his ship's tractor beam, but then his weapon systems failed just as 3 hegemony fighters closed in. "Sir, I know what's causing the failures," Taman said suddenly. Captain Lee turned to look at the young mechanic. "Explain." "The power regulators I warned Commander Veltar about yesterday. The ceramic housings are cracking under combat stress. Every time the pilots push their systems hard, more regulators fail. Can you fix it?" Taman shook his head. "Not from here, sir. The regulators are built into each fighter. Someone would have to physically replace them." On the tactical display, the situation was getting worse. 4 coalition fighters were now drifting powerless while the hegemony fleet pressed their attack. The remaining fighters were afraid to push their systems too hard, knowing they might suffer the same fate. "Captain, the Zephyrian tactical computer estimates our chances of victory at 12%, reported the navigation officer. Captain Lee studied the display with growing desperation. His fighters were being picked off one by one, and the enemy was closing in on the main fleet. In a few minutes, the hegemony ships would be in range to attack the Stellar Harmony directly. "Options," he said grimly. "We could retreat," suggested the Zephyrian officer. "Jump to hyperspace and regroup with the main fleet." "Negative. Those pilots are still out there. We don't abandon our people." Chief Engineer Choi looked up from her console. What if we sent out a repair shuttle? Someone could try to fix the drifting fighters. A repair shuttle against enemy fighters? The flight operations officer shook his head. It would be destroyed in seconds. Taemin stared at the tactical display, his mind racing. The repair shuttles were slow and lightly armored, but they were also small and maneuverable. More importantly, he knew those ships inside and out. He had maintained every repair shuttle on the ship. Sir, he said quietly. I could do it. The bridge fell silent. Everyone turned to look at the young mechanic. Do what? Captain Lee asked. Take a repair shuttle out there. I know exactly what's wrong with those fighters and how to fix it. I could restore power to the drifting ships and get the pilots back in the fight. Commander Jixtar, the senior, Feltharian flight officer who had remained on the ship, laughed coldly. A mechanic? In combat? You would be space dust in 30 seconds, human. Better than losing 6 fighters and their pilots, Taemin replied. You don't know how to fly in combat, Jixtar continued. You have never been trained for battle maneuvers. The enemy fighters will destroy you before you reach the first disabled ship. Maybe, Taemin admitted. But I'm the only one who can fix those power regulators quickly enough to matter. Captain Lee studied the young mechanic carefully. Lee had worked his way up through the coalition ranks over 20 years. He had started as a junior officer on a supply ship and earned his captain's rank through hard work and smart decisions. He knew something about being underestimated. Have you ever flown a shuttle in combat? Lee asked. No, sir, but I've run combat simulations, a lot of them. Simulations aren't real combat. No, sir. But real combat isn't theoretical engineering, either, and I understand those shuttles better than anyone. Captain Lee looked at the tactical display again. The situation was getting worse every second. 3 more coalition fighters had been destroyed while they talked, and the hegemony ships were moving into attack formation. This is against every regulation in the book, Lee said slowly. Yes, sir. If I authorize this, you'll be flying alone, into a combat zone with no backup and no guarantee of survival. I understand, sir. Captain Lee was quiet for a long moment. Finally, he turned to Chief Engineer Choi. Can you modify a repair shuttle for combat? We can add some armor plating and mount basic weapons, she replied. It won't be much, but it might help. How long? 20 minutes. Lee nodded slowly. Do it. He turned back to Taemin. You have 20 minutes to prepare. And mechanic? Yes, sir. Don't make me regret this decision. I won't, sir. As Taemin hurried toward the shuttle. Bay. Sora caught up with him in the corridor. Are you crazy? She demanded. You're going to get yourself killed. Maybe. But if I don't try, a lot of good pilots are going to die. Those pilots wouldn't risk their lives for you. That doesn't matter. It's not about them. It's about doing what's right. Sora grabbed his arm and made him stop walking. Taemin, I've seen your simulation scores. You're good, really good. But this isn't a simulation. Those are real weapons shooting real bullets that will really kill you. I know. Then why? Taemin thought about all the times he had been dismissed, ignored, or told he wasn't good enough. All the dreams he had given up because others said humans weren't capable of more than basic labor. Because somebody has to prove they're wrong, he said finally. And it might as well be me. Sora looked into his eyes and saw the determination there. She knew she couldn't change his mind. Then don't you dare die out there, she said fiercely. Come back so I can tell you how stupid this was. I'll do my best. 20 minutes later, Taemin sat in the pilot seat of Repair Shuttle 7, now designated Grease Lightning thanks to Sora's sense of humor. The other mechanics had worked frantically to install additional armor and mount 2 small laser cannons on the shuttle's hull. It wasn't much compared to a real fighter, but it was better than nothing. Grease Lightning, you are cleared for launch, came Captain Lee's voice over the comm. Understood, Control. Grease Lightning launching. The shuttle bay doors opened, revealing the battle raging outside. Taemin took a deep breath, pushed the throttle forward, and flew into hell. The moment Taemin's shuttle cleared the Stellar Harmony's launch bay, 3 hegemony fighters spotted him and changed course to intercept. Their sleek black ships moved like hunting predators, closing the distance rapidly. New contact launching. From the coalition ship, one of the enemy pilots reported. Small repair vessel, easy target. On the bridge of the Stellar Harmony, Captain Lee watched the tactical display with growing concern. The enemy fighters were converging on Taemin's position from 3 different angles. It looked like a perfect kill formation. "He's not going to make it," muttered Commander Jixtar. "I told you this was foolish." But Taemin wasn't flying like the enemy expected. Instead of following standard evasive patterns taught in flight school, he was doing something completely different. He flew his shuttle like he was navigating the maintenance shafts inside the ship. The first hegemony fighter opened fire with rapid laser bursts. Taemin suddenly cut power to his main engines and fired his maneuvering thrusters in a sequence that sent his shuttle spinning sideways. The enemy pilot's shots missed completely. "What kind of maneuver was that?" asked the sensor operator on the bridge. "Not one I've ever seen," Captain Lee replied, watching in amazement. Taemin knew his shuttle's systems better than any academy-trained pilot could know their fighter. When the engines overheated from the hard maneuver, he didn't panic. He had felt that same heat signature hundreds of times during maintenance checks. He knew exactly how long he could push the systems before they failed. The second enemy fighter tried to attack from below, but Taemin did something that shouldn't have been possible. He used his shuttle's maintenance manipulator arms to grab a piece of floating debris and threw it directly into the enemy's flight path. The hegemony pilot had to break off his attack to avoid the collision. "He's using the shuttle's repair equipment as weapons," Sora observed from the engineering section. She was monitoring Taemin's progress with growing pride and terror. The third enemy fighter managed to get behind Taemin and scored several hits on his rear shields. Warning lights flashed in the shuttle's cockpit as power levels dropped. "Grease. Lightning, your shields are failing," Captain Lee warned over the comm. "I know, sir," Taemin replied calmly. "But I also know exactly how much more punishment they can take." Instead of retreating, Taemin did something that made everyone on the bridge hold their breath. He flew directly toward the nearest asteroid in the debris field, with the enemy fighter following close behind. At the last possible second, Taemin fired his reverse thrusters and spun his shuttle around the asteroid's edge. The enemy pilot, moving too fast to change course, crashed into the asteroid and exploded. "Impossible," whispered Commander Jixtar. "No pilot could calculate that maneuver so precisely." He didn't calculate it, Captain Lee realized. He felt it. He knows that shuttle so well he can sense exactly how it will respond. With one enemy fighter destroyed and the other 2 falling back to regroup, Taemin reached the first drifting coalition ship. It was Commander Veltar's fighter, powerless and defenseless in the middle of the battle. Using his shuttle's magnetic clamps, Taemin attached his ship to the fighter's hull. He quickly opened his toolkit and began working on the external power junction. The ceramic regulator was cracked exactly as he had predicted. Enemy fire erupted around them as the remaining hegemony fighters realized what was happening. Laser bolts flashed past the 2 ships as Taemin worked frantically to install a replacement regulator. "Grease lightning, you have multiple bogies closing on your position," warned the bridge. "Almost finished," Taemin replied, his hands moving quickly over the repair. "Just need 30 more seconds." Those 30 seconds felt like hours. Enemy ships swarmed around them, firing at the helpless ships. Taemin's shuttle shook from near misses, but he kept working. Finally, the new regulator clicked into place. Power flowed back into Commander Veltar's fighter, and its systems came online immediately. "Power restored," Veltar announced, his voice filled with amazement. "All systems functional." The Veltharian commander immediately engaged his engines and weapons, joining the fight to protect Taemin's shuttle. But more coalition fighters needed help, and enemy ships were still closing in. "Commander, I need to reach the other drifting fighters," Taemin said over the comm. "Understood. I'll provide cover." What followed was unlike anything the coalition forces had ever seen. Taemin flew his modified repair shuttle through the battle zone like it was an extension of his own body. When enemy fighters tried to intercept him, He used debris, asteroids, and even disabled ships as cover. His unconventional tactics confused the enemy pilots. They were trained to fight against other fighters that followed standard combat patterns. Taemin's shuttle moved unpredictably, using every piece of equipment in ways they were never designed for. When his weapons overheated, he vented coolant to create a temporary smokescreen. When his shields failed, he used the shuttle's cargo bay doors as improvised armor. When enemy missiles locked onto him, he ejected repair tools to confuse their guidance systems. One by one, Taemin reached the disabled coalition fighters and restored their power. Each repair took only minutes because he knew exactly what was wrong and how to fix it. Soon, 6 fighters that had been drifting helplessly were back in the fight. The tide of the battle began to turn. The restored coalition fighters, now aware of their ship's limitations, fought more cautiously but effectively. They had learned to work within their system's constraints instead of pushing them to failure. But then the long-range sensors detected something that made everyone's blood run cold. "Captain," the sensor operator announced, his voice tight with fear. "Massive ship dropping out of hyperspace. It's 3 times the size of our dreadnought." On the main screen, a huge hegemony vessel appeared. Its hull was black as space itself, covered with weapon emplacements and armor plating. Along its side, painted in blood-red letters, was its name: Death's Herald. "That's a hegemony super dreadnought," Captain Lee said grimly. "It carries enough firepower to destroy our entire
fleet."
The massive ship began moving into position, blocking the coalition fleet's escape route to hyperspace. Its huge weapons started charging with energy that made the space around them glow ominously. "Tactical assessment," Lee ordered. The Zephyrian officer worked quickly at his console. "The Death's Herald has shields and armor that can withstand our combined firepower. Its weapons can destroy the stellar harmony in 3 direct hits. Our fighters cannot penetrate its defenses using conventional attack patterns. Time until it reaches firing position?" 12 minutes, sir." Captain Lee stared at the massive enemy ship with growing desperation. They had managed to save the fighters and hold off the smaller hegemony vessels, but this new threat was beyond their ability to handle. In his shuttle, Taemin was also studying the enemy dreadnought through his sensors. His mechanic's eye was analyzing its design, looking for weaknesses that the tactical computers might have missed. The Death's Herald was an impressive piece of engineering, but like all ships, it had systems that needed maintenance. Taemin could see the external cooling vents, the power conduits, and the structural weak points that any good mechanic would notice. An idea began forming in his mind. It was crazy, impossible, and completely against every rule of space combat. But it might be their only chance. "Control, this is Grease Lightning," he said into his comm. "Go ahead, Grease Lightning. I think I know how to stop that dreadnought." There was a long pause before Captain Lee replied. "Explain." "I need to get inside it, sir. Fly directly into its hangar bay and sabotage the ship from within." The bridge of the stellar harmony fell completely silent. Even the background hum of the ship's systems seemed to quiet as everyone processed what they had just heard. "Say again." "Grease Lightning," Captain Lee said slowly. "The Death's Herald has external cooling systems for its main reactor. If I can get inside and overload those systems, the reactor will go critical. The explosion should be big enough to take out several other enemy ships." "That's suicide," Commander Jixtar protested. "No pilot has ever attempted to fly inside an enemy capital ship." "That's exactly why it might work," Taemin replied. "They won't expect it because it's impossible." Captain Lee looked at the tactical display. The Death's Herald was getting closer to firing position. In a few minutes it would be too late for any plan, no matter how desperate. "Mechanic," he said finally. "Are you certain about this?" "No, sir. But I'm certain we're all dead if we don't try something." Captain Lee closed his eyes for a moment, thinking about all the regulations he was about to break. When he opened them again, his decision was made. "You're authorized for the mission, Grease Lightning. May whatever gods you believe in watch over you." "Thank you, sir." Beginning approach to target. Taemin turned his shuttle toward the massive enemy dreadnought and pushed his engines to maximum power. Behind him, the entire coalition fleet watched as one small human in a modified repair shuttle flew toward certain death. But Taemin wasn't thinking about death. He was thinking about all the times he had been told he wasn't good enough, smart enough, or brave enough to be anything more than a mechanic. It was time to prove them all wrong. The Death's Herald loomed before Taemin like a mountain of black steel and death. The massive hegemony dreadnought was larger than some space stations, bristling with weapon emplacements that could vaporize his small shuttle with a single shot. Grease, lightning, multiple enemy contacts moving to intercept, warned the bridge of the stellar harmony. You have 6 fighters closing on your position. Taemin saw them coming. The enemy pilots thought they were dealing with a desperate suicide run by a panicked mechanic. They expected him to fly in a straight line toward their ship, making him an easy target. They were wrong. Instead of approaching directly, Taemin flew his shuttle in a crazy spiral pattern that took him through the densest part of the debris field. Broken pieces of destroyed ships created a maze of twisted metal and floating obstacles. The hegemony fighters followed, but they couldn't match his maneuvering in the tight spaces. Taemin's shuttle was smaller and more agile than their fighters, and he knew exactly how to use that advantage. He's flying like debris, observed the sensor operator on the Stellar Harmony's bridge. The enemy targeting computers can't get a solid lock on him. Taemin had learned this trick during his maintenance work. When moving through the ship's tight corridors with a repair cart, he had to navigate around obstacles and through spaces that seemed too small. Now he was applying the same principles to space combat. One enemy fighter got too close and clipped a piece of wreckage, sending it spinning out of control. Another pilot, trying to get a clear shot, accidentally fired on his wingman instead of Taemin's shuttle. "Impossible," muttered Commander Jixtar from the bridge. "He's not flying like a pilot. He's flying like a maintenance worker navigating the ship's corridors." "And it's working," Captain Lee added grimly. As Taemin approached the Death's Herald, he got his first close look at the enemy ship's design. The hegemony had built it for maximum intimidation and firepower, but like all military vessels, it needed regular maintenance and support operations. The main hangar bay was located on the ship's underside, protected by energy shields that would normally stop any attacking craft. But the shields were designed to stop weapons and large objects, not a small repair shuttle moving slowly and broadcasting maintenance codes. Taemin had downloaded standard hegemony maintenance frequencies from the Coalition database years ago, just out of curiosity about alien ship designs. Now that knowledge might save his life. "Death's Herald, this is Maintenance Shuttle 7 requesting emergency docking," he broadcast on the hegemony frequency. "We have critical cargo requiring immediate attention." The response came back in the harsh hegemony language, which Taemin's computer translated. "Maintenance Shuttle 7, you are not on our flight schedule. Identify your authorization codes." Taemin was ready for this. Authorization codes were damaged during the battle. Request manual override for emergency docking. We have wounded crew aboard. There was a long pause. The Death's Herald's traffic control was probably trying to decide whether to let him through or blast him out of space. Finally, the massive hangar bay doors began to open. "Maintenance Shuttle 7, you are cleared for emergency docking. Proceed to Bay 7 and await security inspection." Acknowledged, Death's Herald. "Thank you for the assistance." On the bridge of the Stellar Harmony, everyone watched in amazement as Taemin's shuttle disappeared into the enemy dreadnought. "He actually made it inside," Captain Lee said quietly. "Now what?" asked Commander Jixtar. "How does one human with a repair shuttle destroy a ship that size?" Captain Lee studied the tactical display. The Death's Herald was almost in position to fire on the Coalition fleet. They had maybe 5 minutes before those massive guns would open fire. "I don't know," Lee admitted. "But if anyone can find a way, it's that mechanic." Inside the Death's Herald, Taemin found himself in a hangar bay larger than most buildings. Enemy fighters were lined up in neat rows, being serviced by mechanical arms and automated systems. Hegemony crew members in dark uniforms were running toward his shuttle with weapons drawn. Taemin quickly activated his shuttle's emergency systems, sealing the cockpit and starting the engines again. He had perhaps 30 seconds before the enemy soldiers would be close enough to stop him. Using his shuttle's maintenance database, Taemin pulled up the standard layout for hegemony capital ships. Every military vessel had similar internal structures dictated by the need for efficient power distribution and life support systems. The main reactor would be located in the ship's center, heavily protected by armor and security systems. But the cooling systems had to extend throughout the ship to prevent overheating, and those systems required regular maintenance access. Taman found what he was looking for: a maintenance corridor that led from the hangar bay toward the reactor core. It would be a tight fit for his shuttle, but he had navigated smaller spaces during his repair work. Enemy soldiers were firing at his shuttle now, their weapons creating sparks and small explosions on his hull. Taman gunned his engines and flew directly toward a maintenance hatch that was barely larger than his ship. "He's not going to fit through that opening," someone said on the Stellar Harmony's bridge as they watched his progress through the ship's sensors. But Taman retracted his shuttle's external equipment and folded in the manipulator arms, making the ship as small as possible. He scraped through the hatch with centimeters to spare and found himself in a long corridor lined with pipes, conduits, and access panels. "Now I'm in my element," he muttered, following the corridor deeper into the ship. The maintenance passages were designed for small robotic repair units, not full-sized shuttles. Taman had to navigate carefully around obstacles and through spaces that seemed impossible to traverse. But his experience maintaining the Stellar Harmony had prepared him for exactly this kind of environment. Behind him, alarms were sounding throughout the Death's Herald. The enemy crew was trying to track his progress through their ship, but the maintenance corridors weren't covered by most security sensors. "Intruder alert," announced the ship's computer system in the hegemony language. "Unauthorized craft detected. In Maintenance Section 7, all security teams respond immediately." Taman could hear enemy soldiers running through nearby corridors, but they couldn't follow him into the tight maintenance spaces. His shuttle was too small for their sensors to track effectively, and he was moving through areas of the ship that most crew members never visited. After 10 minutes of careful navigation, Taman reached his destination, the main reactor cooling control center. It was a large chamber filled with massive pumps, heat exchangers, and monitoring equipment that kept the Death's Herald's power systems from overheating. Taman studied the cooling system design through his shuttle's sensors. The hegemony engineers had built an impressive setup, but they had made one critical mistake. In their effort to maximize cooling efficiency, they had created a system with no redundancy. If the main cooling pumps failed, the backup systems would be overwhelmed within minutes, and Taman knew exactly how to make those pumps fail. He opened his shuttle's tool compartment and pulled out several explosive charges that the mechanics had installed during his ship's hasty modifications. They weren't military-grade weapons, but they would be perfect for destroying delicate machinery. Working quickly, Taman attached charges to the main coolant pumps and the primary heat exchange units. He set the timers to go off in sequence, creating a cascade failure that would overload the entire cooling system. As he worked, enemy soldiers finally found him. They poured into the cooling chamber from multiple entrances, their weapons trained on his shuttle. "Surrender immediately," their leader shouted in accented coalition standard. "You are trapped with no possibility of escape." Taman looked at the charges he had just armed. The timers showed 2 minutes until detonation. The cooling system would fail, the reactor would overheat, and the Death's Herald would explode with the force of a small star. He opened a communication channel to the Stellar Harmony. "Control, this is Grease Lightning." "Go ahead, Grease Lightning. What's your status?" "Mission accomplished, sir. The Death's Herald's reactor will overload in 90 seconds. The explosion should take out at least 2 other enemy ships." There was a pause before Captain Lee responded. "Outstanding work, mechanic. Now get out of there." "Negative, sir. I won't make it back to my shuttle in time. The enemy has me surrounded." "Tae-min," Sora's voice cut in from the engineering section. "There has to be another way." Tae-min looked around, the cooling chamber searching for any possible escape route. The enemy soldiers were closing in, and his explosive charges were counting down toward detonation. Then he saw it. An emergency escape pod mounted in the far corner of the chamber. It was designed for maintenance workers who might get trapped during reactor emergencies. "Tully, there might be a way," he said into his comm. "I'm going to try something crazy." Crazier than flying inside an enemy dreadnought, Captain Lee asked. Easier, sir. Tae-min armed his shuttle's remaining weapons and fired at the enemy soldiers, forcing them to take cover. Then he abandoned his ship and ran toward the escape pod as fast as he could. The hegemony soldiers realized what he was doing and opened fire. Energy bolts flashed past his head as he dove into the escape pod and slammed. The hatch shut behind him. The escape pod tumbled slowly through space, its occupant unconscious from the massive explosion that had destroyed the Death's Herald. Inside the tiny capsule, emergency life support systems worked quietly to keep Tae-min alive, while his body recovered from the shock of the blast. On the bridge of the Stellar Harmony, Captain Lee watched the search and rescue operation with growing concern. The explosion had created a debris field stretching across thousands of kilometers, making it difficult to locate one small escape pod among the wreckage. "Sensor sweep complete," reported the navigation officer. "No sign of the escape pod in Grid 7. Keep searching," Lee ordered. "That mechanic saved all our lives. We're not leaving him out there." Commander Veltar's voice crackled over the comm system from his fighter. "Captain, I'm detecting a faint emergency beacon in Sector 12. It's very weak, but it matches coalition frequencies." "Investigate immediately," Lee replied. "All fighters converge on Commander Veltar's position." Sora Kim paced nervously in the engineering section, checking her chronometer every few seconds. It had been 20 minutes since the explosion, and Tae-min's escape pod only carried 30 minutes of air. "We have to find him," she muttered to Chief Engineer Choi. "We will," Choi replied, though her voice carried doubt. The debris field was enormous and they were running out of time. In his fighter, Commander Veltar followed the weak emergency signal through the wreckage of his enemy's flagship. The Veltharian pilot found himself thinking about the human mechanic, who had risked everything to save coalition lives. Just yesterday, Veltar had dismissed Tae-min as an incompetent grease monkey who didn't understand real technology. Now he realized how wrong he had been. The human had not only fixed the power regulator problem that Veltar had refused to acknowledge, but had also accomplished something that would be remembered throughout coalition history. "Signal is getting stronger," Veltar reported. "I think I've found him." The escape pod was drifting near a large piece of the Death's Herald's hull, almost invisible against the dark metal. Veltar maneuvered his fighter close and activated his tractor beam, carefully pulling the small capsule clear of the debris. "I have the pod," he announced. "Life signs are weak but stable, beginning return to the Stellar Harmony." 20 minutes later, Tae-min woke up in the ship's medical bay. His head throbbed from the explosion's concussion, and his body ached from the rough ride in the escape pod. But he was alive, which was more than he had expected when he started. "This mission, how do you feel?" asked Dr. Min Jung-han, the ship's chief medical officer. "Like I was inside an exploding star," Tae-min replied weakly. "That's not far from the truth. You suffered significant radiation exposure and multiple minor injuries from the blast, but you'll make a full recovery. The battle? Over. The hegemony fleet retreated after you destroyed their flagship. You saved every person on this ship, mechanic." Before Tae-min could respond, the medical bay doors opened, and Captain Lee entered, followed by So-ra and several other crew members. The captain's usually stern face showed something Tae-min had never seen before: genuine respect. "How are you feeling, son?" Lee asked. "Better than I probably should be, sir. You did something today that military historians will be studying for decades, flying a repair shuttle inside an enemy capital ship and destroying it from within. It shouldn't have been possible." "It almost wasn't, sir. I got lucky." "Luck had nothing to do with it," interrupted Commander Veltar as he entered the medical bay. The Veltharian pilot looked uncomfortable, as if he was about to say something difficult. "I owe you an apology, mechanic. I dismissed your warnings about the power regulators, and I questioned your ability as a pilot. I was wrong on both counts." Tae-min was too surprised to speak. Veltharian culture placed enormous importance on honor and status. For a commander to apologize to a human mechanic was almost unheard of. "Your flying today was unlike anything I have ever witnessed," Veltar continued. "You used techniques that are not taught in any academy, maneuvers that should not work according to standard doctrine. Where did you learn to fly like that?" I didn't learn it anywhere, Taman replied honestly. I just flew the shuttle the same way I move through the ship's maintenance corridors. I know how those systems respond because I've worked with them for years. The Veltharian commander nodded slowly. That is what made you dangerous to our enemies. They expected you to behave like a trained pilot, following established patterns and procedures. Instead, you flew like someone who truly understood his machine. Commander Veltar has made a recommendation to Coalition Command, Captain Lee added. He believes you should be offered immediate acceptance into the advanced pilot training program. Taman looked around the medical bay at all the faces watching him. These were people who had doubted him just hours ago, who had seen him as nothing, more than a maintenance worker. Now they were looking at him like he was some kind of hero. I appreciate the offer, sir, he said carefully, but I'm still a mechanic, that's what I'm good at. You're good at a lot more than that, Sora said firmly. Taman, you just proved that humans can do things the other species thought impossible. You can't go back to just fixing pipes and changing filters after this. Chief Engineer Choi stepped forward. The boy has a point, though. We need good mechanics, and he's one of the best we have. Maybe there's a way to use both his skills. Captain Lee smiled for the first time since the battle began. Actually, I have an idea about that. But first you need to recover. We'll discuss your future when you're back on your feet. Over the next few days, as Taman recovered from his injuries, word of his mission spread throughout the Coalition fleet. The story of the human mechanic who destroyed a hegemony superdreadnought became legend among the crews. Other species who had dismissed humans as useful only for manual labor began to reconsider their opinions. If one human could accomplish something this extraordinary, what else might they be capable of? The Zephyrian tactical officer spent hours reviewing the battle recordings, trying to understand how Taman's unconventional tactics had succeeded against superior numbers and firepower. His mathematical mind struggled to process maneuvers that defied standard combat theory. The human's approach was completely illogical, he reported to his superiors. Yet it achieved results that conventional tactics could not. This suggests our understanding of combat dynamics may be incomplete. Meanwhile, the surviving hegemony commanders held their own analysis of the battle. Their reports to High Command painted a disturbing picture of human capabilities. The Coalition humans are more dangerous than we believed, wrote Fleet Commander Zek Moore in his official report. They do not think like us or fight like us. They are unpredictable and willing to attempt maneuvers that our tactical computers classify as impossible. Recommendation? Asked the Hegemony Supreme Commander. Avoid direct confrontation with human crewed vessels until we can develop countermeasures for their unconventional tactics. Back on the Stellar Harmony, Taemin was finally cleared for light duty. He returned to the engineering section to find that his workstation had been decorated with messages and gifts from crew members throughout the ship. You're famous, Sora told him with a grin. Half the ship wants to buy you drinks and the other half wants to learn how you did what you did. I just did my job. Your job was fixing broken equipment. What you did was save everyone's life by thinking outside the box. That afternoon, Captain Lee summoned Taemin to his ready room. The captain's quarters were spacious by ship standards with a large desk and several comfortable chairs. Lee gestured for Taemin to sit. I've been in communication with Coalition Command about your situation, Lee began. They're very interested in what happened here. Am I in trouble, sir? Quite the opposite. You've been offered a direct commission as a Coalition officer, with immediate placement in the advanced pilot program. You would skip all the preliminary training and go straight to combat certification. Taemin was quiet for a long moment. It was everything he had dreamed of since childhood. A chance to be a real pilot, flying missions throughout the galaxy, and earning the respect he had always wanted. There's another option, Lee continued. I've proposed creating a new position, Chief Technical Pilot. You would remain with the engineering department but also serve as a test pilot for modified equipment and unconventional tactics. You would train other mechanics who show piloting aptitude and develop new techniques based on technical knowledge rather than traditional flight training. Both jobs sound amazing, sir. I'm not sure how to choose. Think about what you really want to accomplish. Do you want to be like every other pilot? Or do you want to change how we think about the relationship between engineering and combat operations? Tae-min looked out the viewport at the stars beyond. He thought about all the times he had been told he wasn't good enough to be a pilot, and all the ways his mechanical knowledge had actually made him a better pilot than someone trained in conventional methods. "I want to prove that being different isn't a weakness," he said finally. "Then I think you've made your choice." 2 weeks later, Tae-min stood in the same hangar bay where his incredible mission had begun. But now he wasn't alone. 5 other mechanics stood beside him, all volunteers for the new technical pilot program. 6 months after the Battle of the Stellar Harmony, Commander Tae-min Park stood on the bridge of his own ship, the Coalition cruiser Ingenious Solution. The vessel was unlike any other ship in the fleet, designed by engineers who understood that the best weapons were often the simplest ones. The bridge crew was a mixture of species, all volunteers who had specifically requested to serve under the human who had become known throughout the galaxy as the Mechanic. They came not for glory or advancement, but to learn a new way of thinking about impossible problems. "Captain, we're receiving a distress signal from the merchant vessel Golden Star," reported Lieutenant Hae-Jin Yu, the human communications officer. "They're under attack by hegemony raiders in the Kepler system." "How many enemy ships?" Tae-min asked, settling into the captain's chair. "Sensor data suggests 4 raiders against 1 merchant vessel. The Golden Star has minimal weapons and no chance of escape." Tae-min studied the tactical display. The Kepler system was known for its asteroid fields and unstable gravitational anomalies. Most military commanders avoided operating there because the environmental hazards made conventional tactics too dangerous. "Estimated time to intercept? 3 hours at maximum speed, sir." "Too long. The merchant ship will be destroyed before we arrive." Tae-min turned to his chief engineer, Sora Kim, who had accepted transfer to his ship. "What's the status of our experimental drive modifications?" "The enhanced maneuvering system is operational," Sora replied from her engineering station. "But we've never tested it at full power in real combat conditions. Then today we find out if our theories work in practice." Tae-min activated the ship's general comm system. "All hands, this is the captain. We're about to attempt a high-speed rescue operation using untested equipment. Everyone strap in and prepare for some creative flying." The Ingenious Solution wasn't the fastest ship in the Coalition fleet, but it had been modified with systems that allowed for maneuvers no standard vessel could attempt. Instead of relying purely on engine power, it used gravitational manipulation and inertial dampening in ways that violated several engineering textbooks. "Beginning acceleration," announced the helmsman, Ensign Woo-Jin Park, one of Tae-min's original technical pilot trainees. "We should reach the Kepler system in 45 minutes. As the ship leaped forward at speeds that should have been impossible for its size, Tae-min reflected on how much had changed since that desperate battle 6 months ago. The Coalition military had initially been skeptical of his unconventional methods, but results were hard to argue with. His technical pilot program had grown from 5 trainees to over 200, with mechanics turned pilots serving throughout the fleet. They brought a different perspective to combat operations, seeing solutions that traditionally trained pilots missed. More importantly, other species were beginning to recognize that humans possessed unique problem-solving abilities. The Zephyrians, with their mathematical minds, were excellent at calculating optimal solutions to known problems. The Veltharians, with their superior reflexes, excelled at executing complex maneuvers. But humans had something different: the ability to look at a situation everyone else considered hopeless and say, "What if we try something completely different?" "Dropping out of hyperspace in 30 seconds, Woo-Jin announced. "Sensors detect multiple explosions in the target area." "Are we too late?" asked Lieutenant Yu. "We'll find out. Take us in, but keep us in the asteroid field. I want to see what we're dealing with before we reveal ourselves." The Ingenious Solution emerged from hyperspace among the rocky debris of the Kepler asteroid field. On the main screen, they could see the merchant vessel Golden Star drifting powerless while 4 hegemony raiders circled like hunting predators. "The merchant ship has lost main power," reported the sensor operator. "But I'm detecting life signs aboard. The crew is still alive. Hegemony raiders are preparing to board," added the tactical officer. Standard procedure. They'll take the crew as slaves and strip the ship of anything valuable. Taemin studied the enemy formation. The raiders were positioned to cover all escape routes from the merchant vessel. They had clearly done this many times before and followed a well-established pattern, which meant they would be completely unprepared for what he was about to do. Sora, I need you to modify our tractor beam emitters for wide dispersal mode, he ordered. Sir, that will reduce their effective range by 60%, she replied from engineering. Perfect. Woojin, plot a course that takes us through the densest part of the asteroid field. I want to get as close as possible without being detected. Captain, that's incredibly dangerous, the navigator warned. One collision with a large asteroid could destroy the ship. Then we'll just have to not collide with any asteroids, Taemin replied with a slight smile. The ingenious solution moved through the asteroid field like a ghost, using the rocky debris as cover while approaching the battle scene. Taemin's crew had trained extensively for this kind of operation, learning to use environmental hazards as tactical advantages rather than obstacles to avoid. We're in position, Wu Jin reported. But sir, I don't see how we can engage 4 raiders simultaneously. They'll overwhelm us with concentrated fire. We're not going to fight them, Taemin explained. We're going to confuse them. He activated the modified tractor beam system that Sora had designed. Instead of grabbing one target with focused energy, it could manipulate multiple objects with reduced precision. Taemin used it to grab several large asteroids and began hurling them toward the hegemony raiders. What are they doing? Demanded the lead raider captain as his ship's sensors detected massive objects moving toward them. The asteroids are moving on their own, his tactical officer reported in confusion. It's like they're being thrown by some invisible force. The raiders scattered to avoid the incoming rocks, breaking their formation around the merchant vessel. In the chaos, none of them noticed the small coalition ship hiding among the asteroids. Phase 2, Taemin announced. Launch all maintenance drones. The ingenious solutions hangar bay opened and released dozens of small robotic repair units. To most observers, they looked like harmless maintenance equipment. But Taemin's engineering team had made some creative modifications. The drones swarmed toward the hegemony raiders, attaching themselves to the enemy ship's hulls like metallic parasites. Instead of performing repairs, they began systematically, disrupting power systems and jamming communication arrays. My weapons are offline, reported one raider captain to his squadron leader. Mine too, and I'm getting system failures throughout the ship. What's causing this? I don't know. There are small objects attached to our hull, but they look like maintenance robots. We'll get rid of them. But the drones were too small for the raiders' weapons to target effectively, and they had been programmed with evasion routines developed by mechanics who understood exactly how to stay out of reach of standard defensive systems. Phase 3. Taemin continued calmly. Begin rescue operation. While the hegemony raiders struggled with their system failures, the ingenious solution moved to the crippled merchant vessel and began transferring the crew to safety. The operation took less than 10 minutes, with the raiders too distracted by their technical problems to interfere. All civilians safely aboard, reported the transporter chief. Now for the finale, Taemin said. Sora, are you ready with the surprise? Standing by, Captain. Execute. The maintenance drones attached to the raider ships suddenly activated their emergency beacon systems, broadcasting coalition military frequencies at maximum power. To any nearby ships, it would appear that the hegemony raiders were sending surrender signals. More importantly, the beacons overloaded the raiders' communication systems, leaving them unable to coordinate their attacks or call for reinforcements. This is impossible. The lead raider captain transmitted on an emergency frequency. How are maintenance drones defeating military vessels? Taemin opened a channel to respond. They're not defeating you, Captain. They're just proving that the most advanced weapon in the galaxy is a creative mind applied to simple tools. Who is this? Identify yourself. Commander Taemin Park, Coalition Navy. You and your ships will withdraw immediately or face the consequences. 1 coalition cruiser against 4 raiders? You're outnumbered and outgunned. Am I? Take another look at your tactical situation. The raider captain checked his sensors and realized with growing horror that his ships were completely helpless. Their weapons were offline, their communications were jammed, and their engines were producing irregular power fluctuations that made maneuvering dangerous. "How did you do this?" he demanded. "I thought like a mechanic instead of a warrior." "Your ships are excellent weapons of war, but they're also complex machines with thousands of systems that can be disrupted by someone who understands how they work." Faced with the choice between surrender and being stranded in the asteroid field with failing ships, the hegemony raiders chose discretion over valor. They withdrew their boarding parties, recalled their drones, and limped away toward the nearest neutral port. The crew of the Golden Star was safely transferred back to their repaired vessel, and the ingenious solution continued on its patrol route. For Taemin's crew, it was just another successful mission using unconventional tactics.